Hi, this is Joe Bolen, and welcome to Learning VisualBasic.net. We have been focusing on a project called the text editor, and we're going to add in this video the page setup component so it'll make it easier for us to change the margins and also the orientation, be it portrait or landscape, of our document as we do our printing. So let's take a look first of all at where we store our information about this video and where you can get the code that you'll see in the video. Out at pastebin.com/u/jboh is the code for this video as well as for other videos that I've produced. So you can see the code, study it later after the video, and learn more about what I did in the video. Also, the main form for the text editor project is out at Imager, where I have the screen print there, and you can take a look at it and use it as a guideline maybe to design your own text editor project. And then finally, you can always go out to YouTube at Bolen Presents to see not only this video but all the videos that I've created about VisualBasic.net and learn more about VisualBasic.net language. Well, let's get into our code, into our text editor project, and see what we're going to be doing today. First of all, what I have here is our main form, and it's in the Windows Designer in Visual Studio. And what I'm going to be doing is adding into this the code related to our page setup that we have already coded for in our tool strip event, the page setup. So let's bring in the component for our page setup. We'll go to the toolbox, and I have already highlighted the printing areas here, and I'm going to double click on the page setup dialog. And that goes into our component tray, and you'll see that there are a number of properties that we can set for this. The important one, of course, is the document that we'll be working with that needs to be set. We'll do that in code. And there are some others, but we'll take care of that as we develop it in the code behind this instead of doing it during design time. We'll keep the default name just to make it easy to remember. And let's go now into our code and make the changes necessary for this to work. So I'm going to go back to the main form code. And I have here the area that I'm going to be changing, which is where the page setup tool strip menu item click event occurs. So I'm going to get rid of our little to-do list and message box, and I'm going to bring in the code I've already written to make it easier. And I'll just grab that real quickly and drop it in place. Okay, let's talk about what I just did. First of all, we used the page setup dialog 1, which we just brought in to our component tray, and I'm using the with keyword to use this so that I don't have to keep saying page setup dialog 1 for all the changes. So when you see just a dot in front of it, I'm basically saying page setup dialog 1 dot page settings. So what we're doing first of all is we're initializing the page setup dialog 1 page settings with our document's default page settings. So if our document had landscape or portrait, it had certain margin sizes, that would come in and be part of the initial setting of our page settings for the dialog box. Then we do a show dialog of the page setup dialog 1 and give the user a chance to change those settings if they like, or just click OK. Once they've changed the settings and clicked OK, then we retrieve the dialog's page settings and then assign it back to the print document 1 default page settings. So we initialize it with the page 1 or print document default page settings, and then we conclude afterwards when we get an OK response by changing it to change the settings for our document 1. Okay, let's watch this work. I'm going to quickly make it a little bit smaller for us and then run this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is come in here to File, Print Page Setup. We'll run the code we just added. and you'll see it right here. And basically it's very simple, and it came in with the default settings that I already had for the printer. So I came in with a inch margin left and right, and an inch top and bottom for the margin, and it came in portrait mode. Well, this gives me a chance that I can change it. I like to use 3/4 of an inch for left and right margin, and I'll choose OK. And now using our default printer settings that we had created in our first video about printing, we'll take a look in the print view and see what happened. And we can see that our page is printed out. We've got our 3/4 inch margin instead of an inch. We've got an inch top and an inch bottom to it, and we see the printable area that we're going to be working with. We can change that again, and I'll go landscape for this one. We'll do a page setup, and now I'll change it to landscape, and I'll change the margins again. And now we'll see it in landscape mode. I'll do a print preview again, and our document now is in landscape mode. Once again, we're have our 3/4 inch margin on each side, our inch top and inch bottom, and we've changed the number of lines that could print in there because landscape mode reduces the number of lines per the height of the printable area that we have now. So that takes care of that, and maybe that's all you need. Now, personally, I like to set my configuration ahead of time before I start. As you saw, I came in and I had an inch margin as a default. Well, I'd like to change that so that anytime I start the program, I'll have what I need. Now, I'm going to go back to the Forms Designer, and I can double-click on the form itself, or I can come over here to the Event button on the main form, and you'll see the load event is what happens as a default event. When the form first gets started, it runs the load event, and this happens before the form is actually displayed. And this is an excellent area where we can do some housekeeping and initialize some of our settings. And that's where I'm going to code the page setup settings so it'll have the preferences that I like to use. So I'm going to click the load event here and create the code for it. Let's go back into the code itself, and I'll go full screen, and I do a little housekeeping cleanup here myself before I begin the code. And now I'm going to add in the information to change the default settings. And I'm going to go back to my documentation where I have that already done, and we'll copy that into place. Okay, copy, and then paste. Okay, let's talk about what I just brought in. What I'm doing is declaring a page setup as new page settings. At that point, once I have it declared, I can then reference it. One of the first things I'm going to do, no matter what the default settings are for the printer that I'm using, I'm going to change it to portrait mode by setting the landscape property to false. Then I'm going to change the left and right margin to 3/4 of an inch by making it 75, and then the top margin will be 100, which is 1 inch. So I've changed the margins as my default, and then once I've got that all set, then I apply those settings to the print document 1 default page settings, so that when we do bring up the page setup dialog, it'll come in with initially these settings. We can then change it if we'd like, but these are my personal preferences. You may have something different, but I like to do 3/4 of an inch for my margins, and I like to start out thinking that I'm going to be working with portrait mode. So let's run this now, and you'll see the difference as I start out with this. Okay, I've got the program up. Now, if we've already done the form load event, and we've changed those settings, so when I come in for the first time to page setup, I should have 3/4 of an inch for left and right margin and be in portrait mode. Let's see if that's true. And in fact it is. We have the 0.75 for each left and right, 3/4 of an inch, and we're in portrait mode. And I can change it if I'd like. Let's say I wanted to go landscape and change that to 1 inch there and 1 inch here, And now I want to change it to, once again, 0.75 for the left and the right margin. We got those changed at this point. I haven't had to go out to set my printer. I'm just changing my document internally in the code, saying, okay, let's go to print preview where we've got already some code that'll be generated. And we'll see that now I'm coming out and I'm in landscape mode. On that, I have my inch top and bottom margins, my 3/4 inch left and right margins on that. So we can change on the fly with the page setup dialog component added in the margins before we begin our printing. And of course, if I have my print preview there, I can take a look at it before I print it to make certain I've got exactly what I want. And I highly recommend you put that into your code. All I did was I coded initially in the menu tool strip, the page setup, encoded in the component necessary to make it run. So please put that into your program. I think it gives the user a lot more flexibility on their printing. They can choose the orientation of portrait or landscape. They can also then choose the margins they'd like to use. Maybe they want a very narrow type of margin or a very broad margin. They can change that themselves without exiting out and going to the default printer and changing the default printer settings. We'll do it in code within the program. It's easy to add in. It makes it a much more enjoyable experience for the user, and I highly recommend you study up on how to do that by going out to YouTube and taking a look at this video and other videos about the printing, and also go to pastebin.com/use/JBOH and looking at the code related to this. So until next time, get your hands dirty in the code, and we'll next video show you exactly how to put in the printer parts that are necessary to give us a full range of printing so that we can print multiple pages, both landscape and portrait, and also wrapping our lines or not wrapping our lines. So stay tuned and take care till then.